Hi, and welcome to another edition of Seniors Today. I'm your host, Tom Barty, and our guest today is Mr. Jeff Trager, who is a local entrepreneur and also an event promoter throughout the Bay Area. Welcome, Jeff.
Thank you. Well,
glad you could make it today.
My pleasure.
So I understand that you were recently recognized for 50 years in the industry. So you started when you were about 5 years old, and and some of the people that you worked with range from Ike and Tina Turner to Sly and the Family Stone to it's an endless list of people that you've been involved with over the years.
Yeah, I've worked with everybody from the Rolling Stones to Linda Ronstadt to the Gap Band. When I first started, I worked with Isley Brothers and Curtis Mayfield, and I worked with Al Green,
Wow.
Tom Jones, Engelbert Humperdinck. My job was to fly radio people to Vegas, and we'd have parties in Las Vegas, and Tom Jones would come out and Humperdinck would come out, and then I'd go home the next day.
Wow, that sounds really exciting. And how old were you when you started doing that?
I was 24 when I first got in the record business.
Wow.
Yeah.
Was that centered out of the Bay Area or?
San Francisco.
Okay.
And then I went, became a national promotion director and regional promotion director for different labels.
Uh-huh.
So.
What were some of the labels you worked with?
Well, I represented, I started with A&M Records with Herb Alpert and Jerry Moss, and then I worked with London Records, which was the Rolling Stones. It was 10 years after the Moody Blues was on that label.
Moody Blues, too,
Them, which was Van Morrison's group. They had an incredible classical division too, so I got involved with. I started as a record salesman.
Uh-huh.
I got started. I was a bellboy at a hotel in San Francisco called the Jack Tar.
Wow.
And I met George Moscone, who was a senator, and he used to get his haircuts there. And I used to take George down to a little club in San Francisco called the Both And. I took him to see Stan Getz.
Okay.
And then I took him to see Ike and Tina Turner.
Wow.
And he wanted to meet Tina.
Well, who didn't?
And I said, I don't think so. I don't think so. I don't think it's a good idea. I says, that's Ike Turner. That's her husband.
Yeah, he'd knuckle him, right?
Oh, yeah. At least.
Yeah, I heard things about Ike Turner.
Yeah. But,
over the years.
But I worked for a lot of labels. I went to work for a label called Blue Thumb Records in Los Angeles. I didn't really want to leave, but I broke a record called I've Been Loving You Too Long, which was written by Otis Redding back in 1963. And then Ike and Tina cut it and put it out on Blue Thumb Records. And they sent me a box of records, and I opened it up, and there was Ike and Tina Turner in whiteface eating watermelon. And I went, this is interesting, and I'm supposed to take this to the R&B stations. It was called Out of Season, but there was a single off there called I've Been Loving You Too Long, which Otis Redding had a big hit with. So Ike and Tina had never had a crossover record. In other words, there were certain stations that wouldn't play, most of the pop stations wouldn't touch them. In those days, there was sort of the radio stations only played so many R&B records.
Yeah.
So they let KDIA and K-Soul play those. It's a quota. They had a quota.
Yeah.
When I started, they used to call them race records.
Oh, yeah?
The R&B records.
But this was a transition for them and kind of a breakthrough for them.
Because basically a lot of people didn't know who they were because the pop stations
wouldn't.
I don't want to call them white stations, but pop stations
Yeah.
more, you know.
Yeah.
But they never played Ike and Tina Turner.
Yeah.
And I thought that was a hit record. I said, it was a great blues record, and Tina was at her best. That's great raspy voice, and Ike produced it, and it was a great record. So what I did was, when I went to KFRC, which was the top station in San Francisco, first thing they said to me, it was too black. And I says, I don't understand what you're talking about. I said, well, it's too raunchy. I said, well, okay, then it's too raunchy. But I was in here with James Brown record last week, and an Al Green record, and Curtis Mayfield. So I don't understand, why. They just like to say no to a lot of records because the competition was incredible. So I went over to KDIA, and I said to the program director, I says, this is a great record. I says, help me get this on, cross this over, okay? So he said, well, I'll keep it in top 10 rotation for 6 weeks. Let's try that, which means they're pounding it and making it a hit in the...
Just by playing it.
Yeah, in the marketplace. And what I would do and I did the same thing with KSOL. So at night, I got a bunch of 45s. The record company sent me a whole bunch of 45s, and I go into places like Richmond and Oakland and San Francisco. There would be Black Mama Papa stores, and I go in there, give them a box of record, run in and say, I need you to report this because I got to get it on KFRC. I said, I get it on KFRC, that means you're going to sell more records. So these 45s are yours, and because that's how you worked it. You get them to report it to KFRC. Well, KFRC finally added the record. The guy said that this record's selling. And it really, legitimately, it was selling, but it was mostly the R&B, the little Black Mama Papa stores were selling most of the records.
Yeah.
And then Tower Records was getting sales on the album. So I knew I had a record. It's because Ike and Tina was never played on pop radio. They never had a chance to reach the masses, and that's you have to have everybody. You have all kinds of both kinds of radio stations playing it.
So when you work for A&M and some of the other labels, you would do promotion, you would do bookings. You would work with radio stations?
Well, I started as a record salesman, okay, for A&M, and went down to met Herb Alpert and Jerry Moss, the A&M, and I walked into Alpert's office, and there was Quincy Jones and Antonio Carlos Jobim, George Benson, and a guy shorter than I was. His name was Paul Williams. Remember, the songwriter wrote a lot of hits for the Carpenters, and they were having a meeting, and Alpert said, come in, and he introduced me there, and I'm saying to myself, geez, a week ago I was a bellboy. These guys were iconic, I mean, George had yet to have his big breakthrough where he had the big hit with Masquerade, but Quincy Jones, my God, it was,
Well, he was number one.
Well, he was, he was a legend. And then Joe Beam was one of the creators of the bossa nova sound. I loved bossa nova. That was my jazz and bossa nova were my favorites. So I started as a salesman, and then the guy who ran the distributor, I used to go in on Saturdays and listen to music. And he came in and he said, you really love music. And I says, yeah, I see you every Saturday. And I said, yeah. I says, I'm looking for, stuff that, that would sell. And so he says, you know what I'm gonna do? I says, I got 6 promotion guys. I'm going to fire them all, and I'm going to make you my promotion guy. In other words, he did it so he could save money, but he knew that I knew what I was talking about.
Win-win situation.
Yeah, I was picking hit records. The first record I broke was Spencer Davis, "I'm a Man," which was Stevie Wynn, was 16 years old, was on that record. And you know, from there he went to Traffic and then had a solo thing.
Yeah.
And then all these labels, since I was getting records played a lot in San Francisco and the Bay Area, because I knew the marketplace very well. I knew that when I had an R&B record, I could go to Sacramento and get it played up there, and I could get it played down at Monterey because they had Fort Ord. And they had a lot of black servicemen that served out of there. So I sold a lot of singles, and the record companies saw that, and they were coming at me like crazy to go to work for them, go to New York, go to LA. Bill Cosby had a label called Tetragrammaton. Deep Purple was on, and I said I wasn't ready to go. I'm from San Francisco. My family's from San Francisco. My friends. I just didn't want to leave.
Yeah, well, I remember Deep Purple too. I was thinking the other day that, you know, we were. I don't know how old you are, and you don't have to tell us, but.
No, I'll be 74 Saturday.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow, you're pretty well preserved.
I stopped drinking.
Oh, well, yeah, that always helps. But I was thinking how lucky we were, I mean, for me, to grow up in the 60s and partly the 70s, and to be able to experience all the creativity that existed in the early days of rock and roll and the transition from blues to rock and roll. And it's just amazing thinking about it. You know, one of my favorite groups used to be the Moody Blues, and it was because they were also kind of a fusion group with rock and roll and classical and others.
Well, they had the album called Days of Future Past, and from there, the second record I ever broke was Nights in White Satin.
Satin, yeah.
And they didn't want to put it out as a single because they didn't think it was a hit, because it wasn't. It was outside the box.
Yeah,
you know, it had the London Philharmonic Orchestra behind it.
Yeah, it was more on the classical side.
But I said, this album is selling like crazy. Release it as a single so we could get it on KFRC or the other top 40 stations. They never played album tracks. You had to put out a single. And it was huge.
Well, when I was in high school, there were a couple of cute girls that lived across the street from my parents' house. And getting to know them, their dad was a promoter for Musicland. I don't know if you remember. It was a
chain. It was a chain. Yeah.
And he would drive all the way to Montana, the Dakotas, you know, Chicago, the Midwest, and he would always give me these demo records. So I used to have tons of 45s. It's like T-Rex.
Oh yeah, that was on Blue Thumb.
I had a T-Rex album, or a T-Rex 45 release in 1969, 1970. And I don't think they were really popular.
Well, they never got really big. They had one single called Ride a Swan. Ride a Swan? Yeah. Ride a White Swan.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it was just cool to get a lot of these, be there on the early release of some of these unknown artists.
Yeah.
And you could tell the tunes that were going to be successful. I mean, because they would hit you right away. Other stuff was, you know.
Well, you would think, you know, there's varying degrees of hits, and you know, a hit record is when people put their hand in their pocket and pull out 99 cents and buy the 45. That's what a hit was.
Yeah.
See.
Yeah. Well, hardly anybody nowadays even knows what a 45 is.
Wow.
We used to have 78s.
Yeah.
I mean, that really goes way back. I mean, we'll probably never see those again.
Well, the ironic thing about was my dad's first job was in Vallejo at McKinley Grammar School. And then he went into the war, and when he came back, he became a principal, vice principal, then a principal for 30 years in San Francisco. But he had a school down on 6th and Harrison, and I used to pull up in my Cadillac, and I'd have a trunk full of 45s. And it'd be the Impressions, and it'd be Isley Brothers, and it'd be great records, Al Green, all the guys that I was working. And my dad would be going like this, and the kids would see me and they'd run over to my car. And I'd hand out all these 45s to these kids, because, I had hundreds of 45s, thousands in my trunk. And then when my dad got home, he said, I never want to see you here I never want to see you at the school again. Because the kids...
A little bit of conflict of interest, maybe.
Yeah.
But that's a cool story.
Well, yeah, it's my father never really realized what I did for a living. I didn't know what I wanted to do while I was going to City College and while I was a bellboy. But he said, look, just don't worry about it. It'll find you.
Did you ever work closely with the various DJs of the radio stations?
Oh yeah. We used to. I used to play golf with the guys from KDIA, the program director. You became their friends, and if they trusted you, which they did, because when I'd come in and I'd say this, I think this could be a hit. Okay, they would at least listen to me. Because there were 50 promotion guys coming in there every week, all with the stacks of records, and I was very careful not to yell, cry wolf, about every record being a hit, because they weren't.
Yeah, then they won't believe you after a while.
No, so we'd go up to Enrico's and we'd drink and we'd hang out, and I go to the radio station. I go to the radio station in the middle of the night. And sit with the all-night jock and just talk music.
Did you know Doug Edwards?
No, from...
He was a jazz...
At K-Jazz?
Yeah.
No.
Well, anyway, I remember being with him late one night in Berkeley at the station. We doing an interview for the Jazz Festival. And that's just my little piece of the iceberg where you've got the whole enchilada. But
yeah, well, I went to all the radio stations. You kind of, if you only go to top 40 stations, then what about the KDI and K-Soul? And what about K-Jazz? Because I broke a record by Keith Jarrett on KRE, which was part of KBLX.
Yeah.
Because I thought of going there with the album, and it wound up selling 350,000 albums.
Yeah, I think I saw him live in Minneapolis.
Yeah.
But the reason I asked about DJs is because when I was growing up, as an early teenager, I listened to mostly classical. My brothers did all the new rock and roll and Elvis and all that. And but I always heard the music. And one of the most popular DJs in Buffalo, where I grew up, was True Don Blue.
Oh yeah, sure.
And Don Blue
yeah.
ended up coming to San Francisco.
K101.
Yeah, and he's probably 80 years old by now, maybe 75 or something. But I even heard him as recently as a couple of years ago.
Yeah, I remember Don Blue.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting how all that works out.
It's a fascinating business. It's a big money business. There's not too much difference between sports and music because they're both entertainers.
Yeah.
That's the way it is. Baseball players, basketball, they're entertainers. People pay to see them, and same thing with artists. And if you're really good, you can make, just like a ball player, you can make a lot of money, especially if you write.
Yeah.
See, one thing about Herb Alpert was he hired great writers. He hired Carole King at one time. He had Paul Williams. That's where you make your money, publishing. Mm-hmm. It's just an arm of your label.
So did you ever do anything with the Tubes?
I played softball against Faye Weebill. No, I
Okay.
used to go see their shows.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Or how about Santana?
Yeah, I knew most of the guys in the band. I knew Carlos because he lived with his manager was a friend of mine, and I